let's dive in. Today we're tackling recreational drugs.
Sounds intense.
It is, but we've got a great guide.
Oh, what's that?
Uncloaked,
Ugh.
the unfiltered revelation of recreational drugs by Conrad Reicher. It's really going to challenge some assumptions.
I'm intrigued already. So, what's the plan for this deep dive?
We're going way beyond the headlines, past the hype and the fear-mongering.
Yeah.
We're getting into the science, the history, the real impact of recreational drugs.
I like it. A deep dive that's actually deep. Where do we even start with something this complex?
Reicher covers so much. Brain chemistry, microdosing, alcohol's crazy history, the war on drugs, even psilocybin as medicine, and the whole black market scene. It's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there about drugs, so having a solid scientific foundation is key. That's what I appreciate about Reicher's approach. He doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
Exactly. He breaks down complicated stuff like how neurons and neurotransmitters work in a way that anyone can understand.
Makes it easier to grasp how different drugs actually affect the brain.
Right. He uses examples everyone's heard of, like marijuana, mescaline, psilocybin, to show how they interact with those receptors in your brain. Pretty fascinating stuff.
And he doesn't just skim the surface. He goes deep into things like dopamine and how some drugs basically hijack your brain's reward system.
Yeah, the addiction chapter was a real eye-opener.
It's crucial to understand how those reward pathways work, especially with substances that can be so habit-forming.
Speaking of habit forming, have you heard much about this whole microdosing trend?
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere these days.
Reicher actually dedicates a whole section to it. He presents a pretty balanced view, looking at both the potential benefits and the risks.
The risks being.
Well, the research is still pretty limited.
Right. Lots of anecdotal evidence, but not enough hard science to say for sure what the long-term effects might be.
He emphasizes the importance of talking to a doctor before you even think about experimenting, especially with all the potential interactions with other meds or pre-existing conditions.
Wise advice. It's not something to take lightly.
For sure. Now, let's switch gears to something a little more familiar.
Okay, I'm following.
Alcohol. I was honestly shocked by how far back its use goes.
Oh, yeah. How far back are we talking?
Reicher takes us all the way back to ancient civilizations. It's been a part of human culture for, forever.
It's true. Alcohol is deeply embedded in our social rituals, celebrations, even religious practices.
It's wild how something so commonplace has this long, complicated history.
And Reicher doesn't gloss over the negative side either. He talks about the cognitive and social effects, the good and the bad.
Right. 1 minute you're enjoying a glass of wine with dinner, and the next, well, things can get messy.
It's a fine line between responsible use and, well, abuse.
Absolutely. Okay, ready for a slightly heavier topic?
Hit me with it.
The war on drugs. Reicher's take on Nixon's policies and their lasting impact was honestly eye-opening.
Yeah, the book really digs into the unintended consequences of that era.
Things like mass incarceration, especially within minority communities, the rise of a powerful black market, the insane economic costs of prohibition.
And the fact that it didn't really work. The war on drugs failed to achieve its stated goals.
Reicher also gets into the politics behind it all, arguing that it wasn't just about public health, but about social control and political maneuvering.
He even goes so far as to suggest it was a way to target specific groups.
You can't deny the racial disparities in drug enforcement. It raises some serious questions about the motives behind these policies and whether they were truly about public safety.
It makes you wonder if our current drug policies are really effective or just doing more harm than good. Makes you wonder what the alternative is, right? Like if we shifted away from punishment and towards something else.
Well, Reicher talks about harm reduction.
Okay, harm reduction. What exactly does that look like?
It's about, reducing the negative consequences of drug use, but not necessarily demanding that people just quit cold turkey. It's more about meeting them where they're at.
Interesting. So what, like providing clean needles or something?
That's one example, yeah. Needle exchange programs, safe injection sites, making drug testing kits more accessible, so people can at least know what they're taking.
So less about arresting people and more about keeping them safe.
Exactly. And Reicher brings up naloxone, that medication that can reverse opioid overdoses. It's literally saving lives.
Makes sense. But does he have any, hard evidence that harm reduction actually works?
He does. He points to places like Switzerland and Portugal. They've actually seen a decrease in drug-related deaths and HIV infections since implementing these policies.
Wow, that's impressive. Didn't Portugal decriminalize all drugs back in 2001?
They did. And
Yeah.
instead of throwing people in jail for possession, they focused on treatment, harm reduction services, and social support.
And it worked.
Drug use actually went down. And along with it, HIV infection rates and drug-related crime.
Huh. That's pretty compelling. So it's not just about being compassionate, it's actually a more effective approach.
That's the argument Reicher makes. He also highlights the economic benefits of harm reduction. Like, it's much cheaper to prevent overdoses and diseases than to treat them after the fact.
Makes sense. Prevention over cure, right?
Right. Now, Riker doesn't let the pharmaceutical industry off the hook either.
Ooh, how so?
He's pretty critical of Big Pharma, arguing that their lobbying efforts have often put profits ahead of public health.
Interesting. Any specific examples?
He brings up the opioid crisis. You know how these highly addictive painkillers were marketed so aggressively, downplaying the risk.
Yeah, that was a mess.
He suggests that Big Pharma has a vested interest in keeping certain substances illegal, especially those that might compete with their patented drugs. Makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. It's like, where are the priorities here? Is it really about helping people, or is it about protecting the bottom line?
And that brings us to something that's been getting a lot of buzz lately: psychedelics.
Oh, yeah. I've been hearing more and more about that.
Riker dedicates a good chunk of the book to exploring their therapeutic potential, things like psilocybin, LSD, ayahuasca. He seems pretty optimistic about the possibility.
Really? What kind of possibilities are we talking about here?
Well, he cites studies that suggest these substances could be effective in treating conditions like depression, anxiety, addiction, even PTSD.
Wow. I mean, I knew people use them recreationally, but I never thought about their medical applications.
It's fascinating how the perception of these substances is shifting. What was once demonized is now being studied for its potential to heal.
But he's not advocating for just, like, everyone to start tripping out, is he?
No, not at all. He emphasizes that psychedelics are powerful tools and should be used responsibly.
Okay, good. Because they can definitely be unpredictable.
He advocates for a cautious approach, with proper screening, controlled settings, and trained professionals administering the treatment.
Makes sense. Safety first, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it does seem like he believes that with the right safeguards in place, psychedelics could revolutionize how we approach mental health.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is. But the research is pretty compelling. I mean, imagine if we could harness the power of these substances to help people who are struggling with these really tough conditions. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It is. It's like a whole new frontier in medicine.
So we've covered a lot of ground here: brain chemistry, the black market, harm reduction, the pharmaceutical industry, and now psychedelics. Where does Riker go from there?
He goes back to the beginning, like
Yeah.
way back. You know, marijuana wasn't always illegal, right?
I did know that, yeah, but it's easy to forget. It feels like it's always been this taboo thing.
Riker really digs into how it all started, like how prohibition took hold. And it's kind of a crazy story.
Oh yeah, what happened?
Well, there's this guy, Harry Anslinger. He was the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
Okay, I've heard that name.
Yeah, he was a powerful figure, a staunch prohibitionist. And he basically used fear-mongering tactics to demonize marijuana, linking it to crime and violence and insanity.
Wasn't he the one who popularized that whole marijuana menace idea, saying it would turn people into, like, crazed criminals?
Exactly. He painted this picture of marijuana leading to the downfall of society. And unfortunately, a lot of people bought into it.
Those myths really took hold and shaped public opinion for decades.
And that paved the way for the criminalization of marijuana.
And as Riker points out, those policies had a huge impact on minorities, contributing to mass incarceration and fueling racial disparities in drug enforcement.
It's a dark chapter in our history for sure, and it raises some serious questions about the true motives behind those policies.
Right, like, was it really about public health? Or was it something else?
Riker argues that it was more about controlling certain segments of society. It's a stark reminder of how prejudice and misinformation can be used to shape policy and have lasting and often harmful consequences.
So where do we go from here? What's the solution?
Well, Riker seems to believe that harm reduction is a much better path forward.
Yeah, he talks a lot about that. But what does it actually look like in practice?
It's about taking a more pragmatic approach. Like, instead of trying to eradicate drug use altogether, which is pretty unrealistic, we focus on reducing the negative consequences associated with it.
So less about punishment and more about support.
Right. It's about recognizing that addiction is a complex issue and that people who use drugs need help, not condemnation.
What kind of help are we talking about?
Things like access to treatment programs, counseling, housing support, and then there are the harm reduction strategies we discussed earlier.
Right, like needle exchange programs and safe injection sites.
Exactly. And making sure people have access to naloxone, which can reverse opioid overdose.
So meeting people where they are and offering support without judgment.
Exactly. And Riker highlights countries like Switzerland and Portugal, where harm reduction policies have led to significant drops in drug-related deaths and HIV infections.
So there's actual evidence to support this approach.
There is. It's not just some idealistic theory. It actually works. And it's more humane, too.
He also points out that harm reduction is more cost-effective.
Oh, absolutely. It's much cheaper to prevent overdoses and diseases than to treat them after the fact.
So it makes sense from both a humanitarian and an economic perspective.
It makes you wonder why more places aren't adopting this approach.
Well, hopefully that's starting to change. It seems like we're finally moving away from that old war on drugs mentality.
Yeah, people are starting to realize that it's not a war we can win,
Yeah.
and that there are more compassionate and effective ways to address drug use.
All right, so we've reached the end of our deep dive into Uncloaked, the unfiltered revelation of recreational drugs by Conrad Riker. What's the final takeaway for our listeners?
I'd say the biggest takeaway is that this is a complex issue with no easy answer. But we need to move beyond the fear and stigma and start having honest, open conversations about drugs. We need to be willing to challenge our assumptions and look at the evidence. And ultimately, we need to choose compassion over punishment.
That's a powerful message. And if anyone out there wants to explore these ideas further, definitely check out Riker's book. It's a fascinating read that challenges a lot of conventional wisdom about drugs.
You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
All right, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Until next time.